Hello everyone. Today we'll talk about risk management plan in this video. So every endeavor that we undertake involves some sort of risk. That is what is risk is all about it. Risk is involved in any work that we undertake. Why do we work? Because we want to attain an objective. If the soldier patrolling the borders of our country will be having a different sort of risk. A doctor manning or undergoing an operation theater, managing our operation theater has a different sort of risk. A student studying for his graduation or probably for his or her post graduation has a different type of risk. Every endeavor involves a certain risk, and this risk stems from the type of work that what one endeavors. I gave you an example of a doctor, soldiers, a student. You name any profession and there would be risk associated with it. So it's absolutely ridiculous if I say you can eliminate risk. No, risk cannot be eliminated. The elemental risk would be always be there in any work, any goal that we pursue. So we need to acknowledge the existence of risk, because the mere fact that we are acknowledging it is obviously solving the problem 50%. We are acknowledging the problem. So we are working towards the solutions. And what are the methods to work towards a solution is the ways to handle risk perhaps. So yes, we are talking about risk management, which is increasingly important as the case might be. The greater complexities levels, vastly varying skills and technology, interdependence, higher, which directly goes to the higher project uncertainty. So increasingly important levels, the more complex kind of job that you do. A surgeon in an hospital, in an operation theater has a difficult amount of risk. The quantum of risk is very high vis-a-vis a clerk or a receptionist of that same hospital. Why? Because the complexity of the job. The patient at the operation theater might come out to be successful, or the operation might go the other way around. In this case, the surgeon has to be blamed for what will happen to the receptionist, what will happen to the executive who's manning the floors. Not much of a risk. So, greater complexity levels, higher level of project uncertainty. Vast varying skills and technology and interdependence is what we call about risk. Now, let us talk about an operational risk. Constant change, replanning, inefficiency, overrun, overspend, low morale, unacceptable work condition is what risk is all about it. Remember, in disasters, what is happening? In emergency situation, what is happening? There's a change, and change is rampant, change is dynamic. In fact, should I say, during disaster or crisis, change is abrupt. So you are looking at inefficiency, you are looking at spending more time at your work, you are at a rescue effort which has to be carried out non-stop for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, 96 hours, until and unless you have averted the disaster or perhaps started the rescue operation or rebuilding the community. So that is the operational risk for a disaster thing. During the risk, if people are working constantly, definitely it means low morale. Definitely it means unacceptable work condition. And in disaster, the work condition becomes pathetic and appalling to be the least. So yes, we are talking about risk management process. What are we looking into it? We are to plan for the risk. And how do we plan for the risk? Is through the database. What are we looking at in the database? Is about the identification of various kind of risks that goes around it. During disaster, natural disasters, man-made disaster, risk analysis, the probability of the risk of the disaster striking, the response thereof. This is how you're going to mitigate the responses. This is comprises of your database, which leads to risk planning, and based upon it you will take the action, take appropriate action, and that is what we are talking about in the project plan phases. So risk management is a part of a project office. Definitely project in this case might be the disaster which has happened. So wider than the project, standard procedures for all projects, all disasters applied to every project. And you may apply to disaster, but it is as applicable to any work, any endeavors that you undertake. Remember, the surgeon undertaking operation is a risk altogether. A student appearing for the examination is a risk, because the student might be successful or might not be successful. There's an element of risk. Maintain risk databases. So how should we take the risk action? Based upon it, either you prepare for the operation, either you know the medical history of the patient, or perhaps from the student's point of view, study all the notes, every part of the syllabus, practice mock test before the actual examination. So that is what we are looking about, compiling actuals versus forecast information, have a data of past data and probably new tasks that needs to be done. In terms of patients, for the surgeon, the medical history needs to be taken into consideration. That is the past data. For a student, taking the mock examination before the actual examination, there's a new task that goes around it. So risk planning, small projects, yes, definitely the community is responsible. Disaster, it's all community based approach. Large project, probably the federal government or the provincial government can chip in. Adopt a risk management approach or policy, as the case might be. You need to appreciate the fact that disaster strikes and it is beyond an individual or even the community capacity to manage such kind of disaster. We require help, we require resource mobilization. So identify the risk factor, identify the mechanism that you can pinpoint, and probably it will help you to elevate or fight with disasters or emergency situation. So risk identification, everything is easier said than done. Believe me or not, during disaster, during emergency, during uh, crisis, things goes array. You are absolutely confused. You end up confused no matter how much practice you have done. The magnanimous of the event actually strikes you and makes you dumbstruck. It is easier said than done. Difficult to ensure full risk identification. Second, perhaps third option, must be honest regarding risk. You need to be identifying the risk. You need to understand what is your capacity and how will you fight it out. And also need to understand that there's certain situation where you need to back off rather than fighting it out. Must highlight everything, all risks, regardless of the repercussion that comes around it. So, specifying a risk example, let's say a poor contract staff performances will not be as productive as estimated, may not be conforming into the in-house standards. If a disaster strikes and you are manually foraging everything, the living beings, the properties, probably it will take days and weeks altogether to remove all the rubble. But if you can take some help of mechanizations, the cranes would have happened, the aerial view to pinpoint survivors where they are located. If you take the help of the technology, it might be done within 48 hours. You might be able to scrap through and probably save quite a few valuable number of lives as much possible. So risk example is poor things leads to poor outcomes, and that needs to be understood time and again. So identification of the risk, the starting point. Where do you begin your journey as far as mitigation of disasters are concerned? The contract, the project plan, you need to understand what is your end objective, maximum benefit for the maximum people, customers, users, acceptance criteria, and mechanism. We are also looking into functional requirements. What a functional requirement is, how fast can we spring back to normalcy, how fast we can start rebuilding, and that is the functional requirement that comes around here. So identification of the risks, so the technical requirements, if it is located in a very geopolitical areas, risky geopolitical areas, that's a technical know-how that you need to take into consideration before commencing with disaster management thing. So that's there is performance, reliability, availability of medicines, or probably maintainability of staff as on when on basis, the developer skills, development environment, the tools, the methods, the hardware, the software, every technological gimmicks, equipments that can at least be an added advantages in the rescue operation. Remember, everything, all the tasks are critical or near critical paths as on when on basis. So risk assessment and analysis, we need to understand the impact and the probability of it happening. The likelihood assessment, focus attention on the higher probability. If you are situated in an earthquake prone zone or a flood prone zone, the higher probability, focus on them, and try to mitigate such kind of disaster. What will happen if such disaster strikes? How fast can you recuperate? That is what we are looking into it. Focus attentions on higher impact effect. That would means related to time, quality, and cost, as the case might be. Time, quality, and cost. It's an effort that you put in, the money that you spend in, and the amount of time that goes around here. Assessment map is just what I've just described to you is a pictorial representation where the probable scale of impact you can plot it on the y-axis, and the likelihood of happening is on the x-axis. So you can have the probable scale if it is high and large, if it is medium and moderate, or high and moderate, or medium or small. The way you want to plot it, what kind of disaster is going to be striking the place of your where you reside, the place where you work, the place where you occupy, the country where you in which you are accessing this particular presentation from. What kind of risk? And you can have an easy map. There are many countries which will hardly ever experience floods. But why? Because they are situated in desert-prone area. So drought must be common, but floods are not common at all. There are countries which are highly prone to earthquakes, probably. Why? Because they are mountainous region. There are countries or there are places which might be looking at tornadoes and hurricanes and tsunamis every now and then. Why? Because they are located near the sea level. So every place has their uniqueness. And what is the probability of high of having it, and on what scale that we talk about it? We can simply have this matrix, and probably you can plot the graph. Assessment risk is the urgency, how soon the risk may occur, how can we avoid such kind of risk, probably what can be the measures that can be installed to avoid such thing. Now we have three actions of risk: avoidance risk, prevention of risk occurrence, no contract stuff, experienced project team members, and potentially expensive, as the case might be. This is what we look forward to it. Risk action is mitigation or reduction in plan, or should I say rebuilding it altogether. So reduce potential risk occurrence, assess contract staff abilities, assess the attitudes to the standard, reduce risk impact. Acceptance action is very important. Possibility of low probability risk, accepting small impact risk as on when on basis is okay for you. Risk database are the references. Now, this is what we are talking about here is um, making data points and trails, if you can go do about it. WBS by reference, work breakdown structures, if we want to go around it. What is the work? What is the disaster that impacts around it? Can we have that work gone into a little bit of a task? Can be broken down into a little bit of an activities? Who is doing it, what is to be done, who is responsible for every task, every activities, and so on and so forth. So give the title and description. This will help you to understand how the work was carried out and leave a print for you to assess post disaster, post the closure of the event. Then we have the potential impact as in quantifiable terms, in terms of time, cost, and effort, quality. So how many manpowers was utilized, for how many days it was utilized, what was the amount of money, dollars that was spent around here, and that needs to be in quantifiable term. So it will give you an understanding of what magnitude of disaster you're dealing with, the multiple impacts, the recorded description, the likelihood, and the scale. These are the potential impact that you need to understand every now and then. So every time a disaster strikes, you are able to note it down and probably make provisions for next disaster on a similar scale. So risk owners are tracking the risk as on when on basis, responsible for implementing the risk action thereof. The database is all about the risk actions, which is avoiding risk, going the simple, plain, vanilla way. Avoiding of risk, can it be done? Probably not in cases of disaster, probably not in cases of any other work that you undertake. Mitigation and acceptance. This is where you need to understand, either you have to understand there would be certain elements of risk, And then there's the other elements is the fact that risk is going to be existing in your life, and you have to go on carry out with your life as a daily activities. Otherwise, things will not go around it. So either you avoid it, mitigate, or acceptance plan. So action log, take the record of the actions taken. So what do we go around it is the risk plan. Simple, short understanding of the video is the statement, the scope, the degree of the risk management that we are willing to take, description of the risk management process, assessment as on when on basis, what we are looking out here, roles and responsibilities, who's responsible for risk management processes, where does the buck stops, reporting structure, and description of the deliverables. Deliverable in terms of risk management, in terms of disaster management, how quickly can we spring back to normalcy is the fundamental aim. With this, I come to an end of risk management plan. Thank you for watching this video till the end.